In October 2019, just outside a quiet town in northern Vermont, I rented a secluded farmhouse on a short-term lease. I'd been struggling with my thesis and needed a place to disconnect, away from campus noise and distractions. The farmhouse sat on a gentle hill, surrounded by thick woods and a wide open field that locals called the Hollow. It looked peaceful at first, but I should have known that when a place has a name like that and no one wants to talk about why, you probably shouldn't be sleeping there alone. The house itself was old, built in the late 1800s, no internet, no cell signal, just a rotary phone that crackled when you lifted the receiver. My landlord, a woman named June, was in her late 70s and insisted I not go into the field at night. She told me it had poor drainage and that it was easy to lose your footing in the dark, but her eyes said something else, like she wasn't telling me everything. I chalked it up to small-town superstition. The first few nights were uneventful. Crisp air, the smell of pine, the kind of silence you only get when you're miles away from traffic. But by the fourth night, I started waking up to strange noises. Not animals, this was different. It sounded like whispering, but far away, carried on the wind. When I looked out my window, the field was always empty. Still, but every time I tried to go back to sleep, the whispering would return, just faint enough that I could never make out what was being said. One morning I walked out to the edge of the hollow, still curious. The grass was unusually short in some spots, flattened in circular patterns that didn't make sense. No animals around, no kids, no farm equipment, just these perfect rings pressed into the ground. I didn't step into the field. Something about it made my stomach knot up. It felt like stepping in would be a mistake. That night, the whispers were louder. The next day, I drove into town to ask about the place. Most people shrugged or said they'd never really gone near it. One older man at the diner who overheard me muttered, "You're staying by the hollow. That land's never stayed quiet, not for long." I asked him what he meant, but he just walked out, leaving his coffee untouched. That night, something changed. I was writing in the living room around midnight when I heard a thump against the back door, then another. It was too deliberate to be wind. I turned off the lamp, and that's when I saw the outline of someone standing at the edge of the field. Just standing, still, facing the house. I couldn't see their face, only the silhouette. I waited. Minutes passed. They didn't move. I finally worked up the nerve to turn on the porch light, but the second I did, the figure was gone, vanished. I hadn't even looked away. The next morning I found small handprints on the kitchen window. I hadn't heard a sound inside, no break-in, no forced locks. Just prints that were too small to be adult, but the fingers were unnaturally long. And they were facing inward, like whatever it was had been on the inside looking out. I tried to contact June, but the rotary phone wouldn't connect to her number. I even drove to her place, but she wasn't home, and the neighbors hadn't seen her in days. And that night I locked every door and window, even dragged a chair under the doorknob like in horror movies, but it didn't matter. Around 3 a.m. I woke up, not to a noise, but the absence of it. That deep country silence had turned into something heavier, like the house was holding its breath. Then I heard the stairs creak, one slow step at a time. I stayed completely still, pretending to sleep. The creaking stopped outside my door. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow. A full minute passed, then I heard the whisper. It was right next to my ear. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed. When the sun came up, the door was wide open and the field was no longer empty. In the middle of the hollow was a scarecrow, tall, crooked, with a stitched burlap face. It hadn't been there the day before. I approached it cautiously. Its arms weren't made of wood. They were real, human, pale, stiff. I couldn't see a face beneath the burlap sack, but the whispering started again, low, guttural, and it was coming from under that sack. I ran. I didn't stop to pack. I drove straight back to the city and never returned. I tried reaching June again. Her phone had been disconnected. When I asked around, someone finally told me she died the week before I moved in. They found her body just beyond the tree line, facing the hollow, mouth open as if screaming. And here's the part that still keeps me up at night. A month later, I received a package in the mail, no return address, just a box. Inside was the burlap sack, the same one from the scarecrow, and on it, stitched in thread darker than blood, was a message. I still know where you sleep. It was September 2021 when I stayed a week at my uncle's property in rural Nebraska near the Sandhills. He'd invited me out after his hip surgery, needing help with chores and livestock. The place was quiet, miles from the nearest neighbor, nothing but vast stretches of wind-swept fields, tall corn stalks, and a two-story farmhouse that hadn't changed since the 50s. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. The kind of isolation that can be either healing or unnerving, depending on your state of mind. For me, it turned into something else entirely. My uncle had always been the reclusive type, borderline paranoid if I'm honest. He had motion lights set up around the barn, an old ham radio set by his bedside, and he always locked the door by sundown. First night there, I thought nothing of it. But the second night I heard him talking through that ham radio like he was expecting someone to answer. He never mentioned who, just sat there muttering, then saying things like, "It's your turn to listen tonight." When I asked about it the next morning, he brushed me off, saying it helped him sleep. A few nights later, I was the one having trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up and the screen door kept tapping softly against its latch. I got up to secure it and noticed something strange. The cornfields were lit up. Every motion light on the property was triggered, glowing like silent sentinels. I scanned for movement but saw nothing. No deer, no coyotes, just stalks of corn waving like they were whispering secrets. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, walked the perimeter, heart pounding harder than it should have. Still nothing. But that sense, the feeling of being watched, clung to me, heavy and unshakable. Things got worse on the fourth night. My uncle woke me around 2 a.m. He looked pale, sweat soaking through his undershirt. He shoved a flashlight into my hand and said, "Don't go past the scarecrow tonight, no matter what you hear." Then he locked himself in his room. I laughed at first, thinking he was having a fever dream or sleepwalking. But when I looked out toward the cornfield, there it was. A scarecrow I hadn't noticed before, right at the edge where the land dips slightly and the field begins. Its posture was unnatural, arms not stretched wide but down, bent at the elbows, almost like it was resting, watching. I couldn't shake the image. That night I lay in bed, covers pulled up, ears straining. Around 3 a.m. I heard something, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the wooden floorboards of the porch. I sat up, holding my breath. Then the porch creaked. Step, pause, step. I reached for the flashlight, but it flickered, refusing to stay on. My phone was dead. I crept toward the window, parting the curtain just enough to look out. The scarecrow was gone. The stake that held it was still there, leaning slightly, but the figure, its burlap head, straw limbs, tattered coat, wasn't. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came, and I checked the field. Nothing, no footprints, no signs of disturbance. My uncle wouldn't speak to me, just stared out the window with bloodshot eyes and muttered to himself. That day, I tried to piece things together. Found old journals in the attic written by my grandfather. They spoke of the listener, a figure the locals once believed haunted the land. Drawn to silence and loneliness, it would take form in things meant to watch. Mannequins, statues, or scarecrows, it didn't hurt you right away, it simply watched until it learned enough to mimic you. That night I bolted the doors myself, but it didn't matter. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the ham radio crackled to life in my uncle's room. He hadn't touched it. We both heard it. Static at first, then something clearer. My own voice asking for help. "Can you hear me? I'm outside." Something's wrong. My blood ran cold. My uncle sobbed into his hands. I froze, unsure if I was awake. Then came the knock at the door, 3 soft taps, followed by my voice again, just beyond the frame, saying, "Let me in, please, it's cold." But I was inside. We didn't answer it, just stayed there, holding our breath until dawn bled through the curtains. After that, I left. My uncle never made it through the winter. When I returned for the funeral, the house was empty, except for the scarecrow. It was back in the field, exactly where it had been before. But it wore something new now. My uncle's hat. In July 2022, I decided to take a break from city life and booked a weekend at a restored farmhouse listed on a short-term rental site. It was nestled deep in the hills of northern Pennsylvania, just outside a forgotten town with a single gas station and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. The listing called it a tranquil rustic escape, and the photos showed wildflower fields, a clawfoot tub, and a fire pit under the stars. It looked perfect. What the photos didn't show was the stretch of dense pine woods that bordered the property, or the strange old barn tucked far behind the house, leaning like it was about to collapse. I arrived late Friday afternoon. The house was charming, creaky floors, vintage furniture, no TV, but clean and cozy. The only odd detail was a framed map on the wall above the fireplace. It showed the property hand-sketched in pencil, with the house, barn, and forest. But there was an area beyond the trees, heavily shaded in charcoal, labelled in small, neat handwriting. "Do not go beyond here." I assumed it was just some old boundary marker or a joke left by the owner. That night was peaceful. I lit a fire outside and stared up at the stars I never saw back home. Around midnight I came back in and noticed the map had tilted slightly on the wall. Maybe it had always been that way, but I could have sworn it was straight earlier. I fixed it and went to bed. At around 2:30 in the morning, I was woken by a distant metallic clanging. 2 quick bangs. I sat up, heart already pounding. It sounded like it came from the direction of the barn. My first instinct was that it might be an animal or the wind rattling something loose, but then it happened again, 2 deliberate bangs, evenly spaced. I looked out the window. The field was still bathed in pale moonlight, and nothing moved. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I decided to check out the barn in daylight. I walked across the field, tall grass brushing my legs, and pushed open the half-rotted door. The inside was darker than it should have been. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Old tools, coils of rusted wire, broken furniture. It looked untouched for years. But in the far corner, something strange caught my eye. A circle of small stones on the floor. At first I thought it was just debris, but it was too precise. Inside the circle sat what looked like a melted candle, a cracked mirror, and what I can only describe as a handmade doll stitched together from burlap and thread, with small pins sticking from its torso. That's when I noticed the scratches on the wall behind it, long vertical gouges, some deeper than others, forming a tally. I counted them, 42. I backed out quickly, locked the barn behind me, and told myself it was probably some old leftover thing from a Halloween event or a prank. Still, it left me rattled. That night I heard the banging again. Same pattern, 2 metallic knocks. But this time there was something else. A second sound followed, fainter, like something dragging across the floorboards downstairs. I crept to the staircase, held my breath, and listened. It stopped. But when I turned back toward the hallway, I swear I saw a shadow at the end of it, just for a split second. No features, just absence. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights on and kept watch. By morning I wanted to leave, but something was keeping me there. Some irrational need to understand what was going on, so I stayed one more night. That evening I decided to check the map again. The section labelled "Do not go beyond here" seemed darker now, the shading heavier. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But something else had changed too. A small X had been added in red ink near the edge of the woods. I hadn't seen it before. That area was outside the barn, deep into the tree line. Against every logical instinct I went. I took a flashlight and followed the back trail into the woods. After about 15 minutes of walking, I found the spot, a clearing, dead silent. No birds, no wind, just a shallow depression in the dirt. And in it another circle of stones, identical to the one in the barn. Except this time there were 2 dolls. One looked old, like the one I had already seen. The second one looked newer. Its burlap was fresh, and it had a pin through the throat. I ran. Back at the house, I found the barn door open. The stone circle had been disturbed. The tally marks on the wall, now there were 43. I packed up that night, drove to the nearest motel, and didn't sleep until I was home the next day. A few weeks later, I checked the listing. It was gone. Out of curiosity, I searched the address. Turns out the house belonged to a man named Ellis Crane, who went missing in 1997. His body was never found, only his car parked neatly at the edge of the woods. He was 43 years old. I never reported anything. I never went back, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced that somewhere out there another pin has been added, and the count is still going up. And that brings us to the end of these chilling countryside tales where silence hides secrets and the open fields aren't always empty. If these stories made your heart race or your mind wander a little deeper into the dark, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more real-life horror stories every week. Stay curious, but never alone.